bist du sie aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschehen? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab. Hier ließ sich reinen taufen,
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Matt Pegas.
And this is Dan Baltic.
And today we're going to record on the classic HBO show, cultural phenomenon, Entourage, which aired from 2004 to 2011. It's a casual Saturday morning. Dan just had a very, he was just telling me he kind of had a very Entourage-esque Friday night into Saturday morning.
Indeed.
Should I cut out that?
No.
Yeah.
Well, let's just roll with it. A big night out, kind of entourage-y night. Went out for dinner, date obviously, and afterwards we. I was moved by the spirit to stop by Nobu for after dinner snacks, which were actually perhaps as expensive or close to as expensive as the dinner itself.
I've never been to Nobu, despite living in LA.
It's great. I mean, I think as we're discussing this, we're probably alienating all of our
listeners.
I
know. We got to make sure
and we sound like big fags. But,
we got to talk about our casual wine dates
yes.
in the Bronze Age pervert sense. But yeah, no, and I've never been to Nobu, but I actually recently went to Le Petit Four. All right, we should probably
it's
fine. but which is a restaurant, Le Petit Four on Sunset Boulevard, which is a really good French restaurant on Sunset that you see them eating a lot in Entourage.
I mean, this ties to Entourage. Like it's an Entourage thing. After dinner to be like, I want to get some yellowtail jalapeno sashimi, and you go to Nobu after dinner because you're Vincent Chase or you're me spending more money than I should.
Yeah,
one or the other.
Look,
Probably
yes,
Vincent Chase spending more money than I should.
Oh yeah, that becomes a plot detail in later seasons. She will get to the sort of unlikely sobriety or negative turns of events that you wouldn't necessarily think the show would take you is part of what I want to talk about with Entourage. But obviously our listeners know we're in these big cities that we do. I hope we're not alienating too many people by delving into we're name dropping restaurants, whatever. I guess that's part of who we are, isn't it, Dan? We're a bi-coastal elite cultural podcast.
This is an aspirational podcast.
Yeah.
If you listen to it long enough, you can be like me and Matt, which is really cool. So you can, on a Saturday afternoon, do a Zoom drinking wine.
Yes, or coffee in my case, discussing Entourage. So I haven't seen all of Entourage yet. It was my idea to this episode. I just started season 5. There's 7 seasons plus a movie. Span of time was 2004 to 2011. So yeah, once again, I haven't seen all of it. So there may be some things that end up happening that I'm not privy to. But that being said, I'm right in the middle of it, liking it a lot. I didn't even remember who recommended it to me. It's just kind of one of these things where, and a lot of other sort of millennial to Zoomer age people I've talked to have experienced the same thing. We're out of the pandemic now, but like all of our sort of habits, including perhaps watching habits, have been irrevocably changed by being locked at home for 2 years. So, but I do think there's some interesting things that come out of that, and a lot of people this is kind of just interesting as a phenomenon. A lot of people, and very much including myself, that I've talked to, again, millennial to Zoomer age, have kind of started watching all of this like prestige TV from the 2000s through early 2010s that we probably missed. And we remember, in my case,
Sopranos is like huge.
Yeah,
Zoomers,
it is. And for me, Sopranos at this point feels like an old culture reference. But I watched all of that. I hadn't seen a minute of Sopranos before March of 2020. So I'm definitely part of that like pandemic Sopranos generation, which is like, I watched it completely unaware that so many other people were, but it really has become a thing. But other shows as well, Mad Men, Breaking Bads of the world, but Entourage too. And I kind of just felt like it was on my list. Obviously, I kind of have the Hollywood and LA connection, which had always made me want to see it, and finally got to it a couple months back, and have just been really liking it. But you, Dan, obviously, as our listeners know, are a bit older than me, and you were kind of more the peak audience for it.
So yeah,
when it was coming out. Yeah,
watching Entourage when men were supposed to be watching Entourage.
When men could be men.
Yes,
or not. Yeah.
This was Entourage was a big thing in like 2005 to 2009, something like that.
I mean, again, I have the note specific running time was 2004 to 2011, but you're probably right. The peak of popularity was exactly probably what you just said. Yeah.
So like I would be watching it in college, and this is a thing. Like, okay, we're 20-year-old guys, we're going out, hitting on women, sometimes being successful, more often than not, going back to our dorms, trying to distract ourselves from how unsuccessful we were. And we would watch Entourage. And that was like a thing. We'd watch Entourage, and we'd like, because it was a sort of like the trite thing is that it's the men's Sex in the City. But like it kind of was, because we'd watch, and we'd see these guys who were, as we said at the beginning, we're an aspirational podcast, joking, but Entourage is an aspirational show. Like you're in a dorm room in New York City, kind of like not have it's not exactly luxurious, but you're watching on the screen Vincent Chase walking around some like palatial Hollywood Hills mansion with like two girls in bikinis, and you're watching that and you're being like, okay, I could see myself as drama. I could see myself as Turtle in that situation. And so that's actually what myself and my friends would do. We'd watch it, but also we'd debate like, well, who's who on this show?
Oh yeah, which is the total the thing that I've never actually seen this in real life. It's more of a joke I'd see on like that whatever his name is, Bruno movie. But yeah, supposedly women do that with Sex in the City and the different characters. And I could imagine that happening with Entourage. That was I was watching this. I never thought we'd do an episode on it. It just kind of occurred to me that why the hell not? And I was watching my overall sense like, oh, this is male Sex in the City. And then when I messaged you about it, you were like, oh yeah, that was like male Sex in the City back in the day. And I was like, oh, I guess I was right. Because another erudite individual thought of it that way. So no, I think that is a really apt description, because it has the sort of different archetypes within a friend group. To back up a half step here, I guess, for anyone who doesn't know about Entourage, the basic premise is it's about an actor, Vincent Chase, A-list type actor, based very loosely on Mark Wahlberg, I believe, who's the executive producer on the show, and his burgeoning career and the ups and many downs as we learn as we get further into seasons of his career as an actor. And then it's also about his entourage, his group of friends, his manager, and then to his brother, who's also a somewhat less successful actor who later ends up on television, and then their other friend Turtle, who's kind of this overweight guy, played by, I think his name is Jerry Ferrera, who has since lost
Yeah.
weight. So good on him. But he kind of doesn't seem to do much of anything. He's sort of, I mean, they're all sort of comic relief. Definitely the brother character, played by what's his name, Kevin Dillon.
Yeah, that's right.
Is also very much comic. The whole show is pretty funny. And part of the joke is like, oh, what is his entourage doing? They're kind of just there to play backup support half the time. Although the manager, Eric, obviously is also sort of like, I feel like this is not that interesting for the pod, but there's a whole debate you can have. Is the main character of Entourage Vince, or is it E? Because they're kind of the two more serious characters. And then, of course, there's also his agent, Ari Gold, based on real life agent Ari Emanuel of William Morris Endeavor, played by Jeremy Piven, who's one of the most memorable characters as well.
Probably
but not to get
the most, I would say.
Yeah, probably, and the funniest, maybe just overall best. He kind of does make the show.
Yeah.
But that's the basic premise. Why was I getting into that?
Go on. Sorry.
Go on. Unpack.
So one thing I'd like to, just before we go past it, Entourage, the whole point of it is that he is success. He becomes successful. He becomes a successful film star, and he's a native New Yorker. He's from Queens. He moves out to LA to be a successful film star, and so he brings his friends. And they're his entourage. Johnny Drama, Turtle. They're his boys. And that is what a lot of stars do, because like you are suddenly in an environment with a lot of sharks, a lot of people who want stuff from you, a lot of people who you can't trust. So both as a sign of largesse, like, I'm the man, so I can give my friends money and, just have them hang with me and not work. That's like I imagine for some men who are rich, like that's gives you a little ego boost. But in addition to that, it serves a real purpose because you bring people who care about you into a world where people are trying to exploit you. So that's the point of the entourage, and that's why E is Vincent Shea's, Adrian Grenier's manager. He hires E, even though E doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. He's not a manager. He doesn't understand the entertainment industry really, but he hires him because
he can trust him
trusts
to be honest.
Yeah,
and specifically, while he doesn't know that much about the entertainment industry, he later learns about it. I mean, the E story in some ways is just as aspirational as the Vince one. You kind of see a very Joe Schmo, and I don't mean that in a bad way, just very average. The whole point is, even Vince, they're all kind of just average dudes. Again, part of the appeal, part of the male Sex of the City of it all, is that as an average dude, you can relate to these guys. But yeah, with E, he does end up learning the business, but really from the pilot, what Vince specifically trusts about is that he can be honest about scripts, because everyone else in the show, including Ari, including Vince's agent, they have ulterior motives, and Ari, the Jeremy Piven agent characters overall, I think fairly sympathetic. We're meant to think that he really does care about Vince, but he's really agenty, and there again from the get-go, one of the key sources of like not tension, but like just one of the things the show explores, I guess, is this. Yeah, the notion you talked about, like when you do become famous and successful, who do you trust? Because everyone that you meet in Hollywood is going to have an ulterior motive, have ideas about you, be latching onto you for their own financial success and clout, as the kids say nowadays. So the whole point is, you bring your group of friends, in this case from Queens, New York, with you because you can trust them. And yeah, the E is specifically trustworthy when it comes to telling Vince which projects he should or shouldn't do. And that little plot thing, which is kind of the base of the pilot, they like get a script, E thinks it's a pile of shit, they don't do it. That keeps coming up like for throughout the entire show. It's like Ari has an idea of something Vince should do, and Vince is like, okay, but what does E think? And then he like the show keeps doing the same thing over and over again in a positive sense, which actually that's this is maybe a bit of a tangent, but that's from like a storytelling level, which I will make the point. I think that the show is kind of you'd think it was kind of, it's a half-hour comedy on HBO from the 2000s. Like, you'd think it'd be kind of silly, and it is, but actually I think the storytelling is pretty good. It's a cut above almost every other, TV show from the same time period or just in general. And one conceit that I really like is that almost like Seinfeld, which is also obviously a really well written show, is supposed to be the show about nothing, where nothing ever changes. Entourage is kind of like that too. Like, there's big dramatic arcs of projects that come together and fall apart, and the whole thing is they're supposed to be seeing a developing career in Hollywood, but actually there's a considerable amount of stasis. The more things change, the more they stay the same. E eventually becomes, he gets other clients besides Vince. He becomes a real manager, but he's still really the same. Vince, they make a big independent movie. They do a huge studio movie. There's all this dramatic stuff that happens, but really the basic sort of broiness of their kind of day-to-day concerns. Yeah. And also, you kind of can't separate the leopard from the spot sort of thing, with the characters never really developing. In this case, not in a negative, like, oh, nothing happens, but in a positive, like some fundamental truth about the way that people are starts to be unpacked. And that's again, I'm not done with the show. That's something I've really noticed, is that it's really about how you can take people in different environments, you can put them in different life circumstances, you can give them money, you can take away money, give fame, take away fame, but they are fundamentally the same. And in this case, also, there's that ties into sort of masculinity. They're the same kind of bro-y energy, all up and down their levels of success and life paths.
Yeah, it's a show about friendship, ultimately. It's a show about male friendship. And in the same way, Seinfeld was ultimately, I think, a show about friendship as well. It was a show about the relationship between the characters. They never go anywhere. The thing is, it's kind of like, it's not, see, like episode, like TV used to write, it used to have real arcs. Or not used to, now it has real arcs. Prestige TV, like The Sopranos started somewhere, it had a story arc, it ends somewhere.
Very much.
Breaking Bad starts somewhere, it has a story arc. Seinfeld was before that, and most sitcoms were before that, and they don't have arcs. It's just about like hanging out with these characters and their relationships, and it's like it's a kind of it's a hang. It's a totally. And that's what Entourage presented. Entourage did have arcs. They did have projects. But as you know,
usually wrapped up by the end of the episode, or if not the end of the episode, then the end of the season.
Yeah, but also they weren't important. Like the arcs in like Breaking Bad or something, that changed the nature of the show. Like certain developments happen and you can't go back. But like Entourage, or many other Seinfeld, things like it, things happen but nothing really happens.
Yeah, exactly. Which is interesting. I mean, the comparison that I'm tempted to make, just from like a TV studies thing here, is The Office, which it's a really normie, almost Reddit. Yeah. But like The Office is a good show. I could talk more at length about it.
It's funny.
So not even to say one thing or other about this, but that's a sitcom that contrasts with the Entourage, Seinfeld. I've never seen Friends, but I imagine the same thing model, where The Office does have arcs, characters change pretty considerable. Well, yeah, more so than in Seinfeld and Entourage. There's kind of more of an arc and a life path to the characters in that.
Somewhat. But I mean, again, it's not like Breaking Bad. It's not like, you start off like Walter White is some beta cuck who wants to cook meth, and then he turns into like, a hardcore G by the end.
Oh, yeah.
Arguably, those things don't even happen in real life. People don't change like that.
Yeah.
But regardless, like in drama, characters have to change because that's what a good drama is. But Entourage is not a good drama, and similarly, Seinfeld is not. It's like it's a it's a hang.
Yeah, it's a hang. That's a good way of describing it.
You hang with the boys. And
exactly. So it's almost, well, I won't even make this. Well, I'll go ahead. It's like I've never been like a big Come Town listener,
exactly,
but
that's what
people,
I was
yeah,
thinking.
yeah, like
It's
maybe,
like,
but yeah,
yeah, like it's kind of like, what Come Town is today. I mean, now obviously one of the boys is gone. It's just Adam and Nick. But yeah, and I mean, to some extent, like people have remarked that we have a rapport,
yeah.
and
No,
I think
podcasts
like,
can be hanged for
yeah,
sure. Yeah,
we like have more of a mission than Come Town. This is not a pod about having sex with your dad, but which is the tagline for Come Town. That's where
yeah,
that comes
yeah.
from. But yeah, regardless, I think, people, to the extent they do tune in, well, thank you, number one. But in addition to that, I think it's because they like hanging with us.
Yeah,
And
I would hope.
that's cool.
Yeah, no, and I've always been a big fan. Not to get too off the topic of Entourage, but you make the podcast you want to listen to, and I've always liked listening to podcasts like this, on my
Yeah,
commute.
yeah.
So, thank you to everyone out there who's joined us. But on the subject of Entourage and on the subject of kind of the male Sex in the City-ness of it,
So this
so
was at the height of pickup culture. Is that what you're about to say?
uh
No, I'm sorry. All
half
right.
point before, definitely
All
want to
right.
get into that because that ties into other
Yeah,
episodes we've done, but half point before that, just like, so if there obviously there's female Sex in the City, traditional Sex in the City, return to tradition in the 90s. Not to overthink this, I guess, but it's like, we often think of like kind of things on this scale of like, oh, things are always getting more progressive, like it's going to be, the normal Ghostbusters in the 80s turn into female Ghostbusters in the 2000s. What's next? Trans Ghostbusters of color. Like we think of things on that trajectory, and I think in a
yeah,
broad, from a broad sort of historical sweeping perspective, culture does kind of move in that direction, getting more progressive. From a right wing standpoint, getting worse. But in actuality, it's more of an oscillation. Things go back and forth, and it's like, why would the male Sex in the City, the kind of more broy Sex in the City, come after the slightly more quasi feminist, if you even want to call it that, old Sex in the City? And I think it does have to do with there being a bit of an oscillation to the movement of culture in this direction. I was barely conscious in the 90s. I was a child in the 2000s, but I do think that you could kind of view the era that Entourage captures, again, 2004 to 2010 or so, as a sort of less progressive, or it's not that it was exactly based either, mind you, which we'll get into, but less, even less woke perhaps than the 90s in certain respects.
yeah.
And obviously less woke than what happened around, the middle of Obama's tenure.
Yeah.
I do kind of remember it. Maybe it's not based, isn't the word, but definitely sort of apolitical.
Yeah.
Culturally apolitical, because there was the Iraq War. It's almost like maybe politics were sort of outsourced to that foreign policy stuff, and like are you patriotic or are you not, or is this war a terrible idea? Like those considerations were so big that on the cultural level, yeah.
In that period, the early, I don't know how, I don't know how statistically significant this is. Maybe social theorists will say like, oh, this is BS. But the early 90s, the economy wasn't really quite going gangbusters. There was a recession around that era, a small recession, and crime was high. Crime was really high in New York City in the early 90s and across the country.
Yeah.
From the early 90s to the 2000s, everything got progressively better. Yeah, indeed, the 9/11 was obviously first and foremost a tragedy, but beyond that, it was something that was a dislocation for our society, but it was something that was assimilated pretty quickly. It
Yeah.
did not really cause maybe it kind of precipitated a dot-com crash, but that dot-com crash did not really crash the economy at all. The economy went along gangbusters until 2008. So that run from the late 90s to 2008 was because I know this. I graduated because like as a young man, you're imbued with, the spirit of your times. And so I
Mm-hmm.
graduated in 2004 from high school. And, I was going to off to college, and I had, visions in my head like, oh, you have the golden ticket. You're gonna, fucking have lots of sex and make
It's the
lots of
case.
money,
Yeah.
and it's gonna be great. And it kind of was. It really,
Yeah.
like, I remember, people in my school, everyone was getting finance jobs. Everyone was like, we would like in our dorms when we were talking about Entourage, we would also talk about like, oh, so and so, this, junior, he's at Lehman now, or this guy is at, Merrill. And the thing is, like, yeah, those guys were going to make, I mean, this is back in like 2006, so this was more money. Those guys are going to make $150,000 next year. That was more money then. Now it's not quite as impressive. But it was also the idea, like, well, in 5 or 10 years, those guys they're going to be making millions a year. And indeed, that turned out to be true for many of them. Many of them are making millions.
Mm-hmm.
But the trajectory changed. It changed for many in 2008.
Yeah. No, gosh.
That was the, like, you have to understand that. Like, I remember I was going to, like, I was an English major, so I graduated and was lucky to find some BS job in public relations. And so I was going into work, and Lehman crashed, and I'm just like, huh, well, this is going to be fucked up, I bet. And like, lo and behold, it just, it kind of, like, I don't think the material effect of Lehman's crash really, it did basically have the stock market, but whatever, that came back.
Mm-hmm.
What the issue more was, it was a road runner looking down and realizing there's no ground beneath him moment for America, and for American men especially. You look down and you realize that the assets you thought were yours actually belonged to banks. You realize that the economy you thought was, that was sturdy, actually is built on nothing. And and after that, it's just kind of like it. The fourth turning bros, Strauss and whoever it is, they consider Strauss and Howe. They consider the Great Recession to be a turning point. That might have been the start of our current fourth turning.
You know what? I think that I agree. Again, I'm not a social theorist, but when I was preparing notes this, I hadn't even really thought it. I said that was kind of a hole in my thinking on this. But yeah, it's not even so much like, oh, politically correct, not politically correct. I think you summed it up really well. I think in the early 90s, so less so original run Sex and the City, but in the early 90s, there was some era of relative political correctness that folks like Alan Bloom and Harold Bloom and others, Polly even, were reacting to. And then that sort of, steadily went away as things got better. I'm not a social theorist either, but you got to wonder or speculate that, things like political correctness, wokeism, and honestly, not that I'm like neoliberal, but like even things like more nationalistic sentiment, they probably are fundamentally a product of malaise with things that are going on. That doesn't necessarily, by the way, I'm not discrediting nationalism. I am something of a nationalist myself, but nevertheless, it's a response to, malaise that may have initially had sort of economic cause.
Like you can be bought off. That's the thing. Like if like I'm doing pretty well right now, but if I say it's not going to happen, but if I were like a partner at one of the top 10 law firms tomorrow, and suddenly making like $3 or $4 million a year, I don't know if I'd have a distant podcast. I'd be like, this $3 million in the bank every year, this looks pretty nice.
Totally.
This, like, it's so material success has a way of distracting people from the very real and important issues, and lack of material success, that has a way of is helping people zero in on the malaise, as you, or not the malaise as the product, but zero in on the problems that cause the
Yeah,
malaise. So the
totally.
way I like to think about the aughts, the way I like to think about that period of prosperity, that hangover era, that, like the movie The Hangover, but I
Hmm.
guess it was sort of a hangover as well, of
Yeah,
the hangover of our prosperity.
yeah,
I like
yeah.
to think of it as a roadrunner type thing where you're like, underneath you, the nation has been hollowed out by immigration, by the Civil Rights Act, by all of these things that essentially have taken away the tools for a vibrant nation and a fair nation. And that's been, taken away from you. And like people they didn't really care, because it's like, well, as long as I got 2 mil in the bank
Exactly.
every year, I don't need a civil rights act if I have 2 mil in the bank every year. I mean, or rather, I don't need to have this act repealed. I
Yeah,
don't need.
I don't need traditional Catholicism, or like I don't need some like traditionalist social order to glom
Yeah, yeah,
onto. I don't
exactly.
need
You
order.
you
I
don't
don't know.
need.
However you want to put it. I don't need
Well, here,
capital T
let's put it
tradition.
very
Yeah.
concretely in sexual practices. You don't need to worry about traditional sexual morality if you're making very good money. I mean, there's exceptions, but like
Yeah, yeah.
if you're like at the elite levels of money making, it's kind of like, yeah, well, I'll have my pick, and that to an extent
Yeah.
is true.
You don't
And I
need to
mean, I
worry.
know
Yeah.
tacos would disagree, but like I mean, I really think there is something to it.
There's something to that also. Yeah, so I mean, let's just back to bring it back to Entourage. Like, what does that era capture? Well, a few, what does the show capture? I think it captures really well the era in question, 2004 to 2010. To anticipate one sort of hole in that argument, it's like, obviously, as we mentioned, this was a very aspirational portrayal of people that were at the top of society, quote unquote. But I mean, there's something to be said for, again, not a social theorist, so I'm just kind of pulling this out of my ass, and it sounds kind of good, but I think there's truth to it. The aspirations of an era, their visions of luxury, wealth,
Yeah, yeah,
success. So, those visions can tell you as much or more about it as a more like quotidian sort of day to day portrayal. And I think
absolutely.
that Entourage makes me nostalgic. Again, I was kind of like 10 to 15, but like Entourage makes me nostalgic for that era in a way that other shows don't quite capture it, because I don't know, just something about the aspirations encapsulated therein. Some of the music was like some of the first like dumbass like urban hip hop songs I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
listening to. I don't know, it just feels very very 2000s, and in a way that it reminds me like, oh, this is what I remember people thought was sexy then. This was what I
absolutely.
saw in the the dumb ass magazines in the supermarket checkout. Like that actually really captures something. But what does it capture? I don't think that it was like a golden era by any, well, in some ways it was, but I don't think it was like politically it was far from like a golden age. It wasn't super based or anything. But it wasn't woke,
Yeah,
and it was basically just a lot like there was more of a divide between politics and culture,
absolutely.
and that's over. And I think that you've unpacked it really well in terms of what that was. It was the moment where Roadrunner was still, hadn't real or not
Wile E.
Roadrunner,
Coyote.
Wile E. Coyote hadn't yet realized that there was no ground
Yeah,
beneath it. It
yeah,
was kind of it was still the sort of post 90s through 2000s boom, and there was a lot of general optimism. There was a lot of very casual enjoyment of wealth, very casual enjoyment of sex. There wasn't this sense, this was before Occupy Wall Street, obviously before the economic crash, so there was a sense that everyone could kind of make it. This was,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I don't know what the actual numbers were, and this maybe is what we'll talk about next, but this was very much before like the incel era. It was
True.
very much a time during which there was a kind of more liberal sexual marketplace. Obviously, I'm sure there was, well, obviously the sexual marketplace is still arguably some kind of liberal, but you know, it was an
Yeah.
era during which there was this kind of middle
Middle
class
ground.
sexually, where there was fantasy or not, there was a sense that anyone with the right in the right setting could kind of get laid in the way that the characters. I
Absolutely.
mean,
The the sexual dynamic during the Entourage era was a little more freewheeling. Men had a little more, it. People didn't seem to be quite as dissatisfied. The incel thing hadn't really kicked
yeah.
off. I think crucially, um, recession has a little bit to do with that. Men losing jobs, opportunities, but
Also the
probably more so than
iPhone.
anything, yeah, more so than anything, Tinder. That
Yeah.
like that killed it for because like you said there is and maybe this we're already back into it. You said that there is a was a sense like you could hook it up with anyone. You could go
Yeah.
out on the town and get anything,
So yeah,
and
which
that was
again,
absolutely true.
and it
That
was
was like I
something of a fantasy, but not completely untrue. Go on.
no,
Yeah.
it absolutely wasn't untrue because like a part of this is okay. I'm older now. I'm not in my 20s. I'm not going out, trying to pick up. Not that I even would now. I'm a little more uh, sexually conservative, but like in my 20s, yeah, before this was before iPhones, before Tinder. We'd go out to bars, myself and my friends, every weekend, and we'd try to get laid and we
And
try to
sometimes
meet
it would work.
women and sometimes it would work like often it would work like
Yeah.
there I have some of my craziest stories are from women I went home with and like I remember like this god maybe I'll get even hate for this but I remember one that sticks out to me particularly is being in my college bar when I was 20 and going over to some woman and running some line and going back to her very nice apartment in the area where I went to college. I went to college in New York City, and this was a very nice building. And later learning that she was a professor at my college,
No,
and
that's something that would happen in Entourage. He
exactly.
like
No, I'm
gets
like, yeah, I
Carla
was
Cugino is his agent briefly, and they end up banging. Like just like random, like
stuff
crazy
like that in
coincidences.
New York
And
City and all over. It happens.
as
Like,
a younger millennial, and I'm sure for older Gen Zers, so you kind of grow up watching things like Entourage and hearing stories from older guys about that, and then you think that's how it is, and you're kind of in for disappointment.
yeah,
Not again, maybe
no,
it's
like
not the best to engage in that kind of thing anyway, but like it's so not how it is anymore. I mean, it's
yeah,
not just
like,
like I don't even think it's
well,
that.
not
Some people would say like, oh, it's now there's more of a divide. Like it's like a few people get all of it, but
not to
honestly,
run
even the guys who
through.
are getting laid, I don't think it's that way. It's not as serendipitous.
Yeah,
That
not to
is,
run through the
yeah,
greatest hits, but like truly serendipity is the correct word there. Like I remember going home one night and some girl started dancing with me as I was walking home outside of a bar, and I'm just like, hell yeah! And I start dancing with her. I go into the bar, we start making out, and I'm back at her place in like an hour. And
yeah,
like
no,
that's what New York City was like in 2010. That was it was I'm okay I was younger and I'm sure young people like I see like Washington Square Park has like throughout COVID has like various degenerates in it doing drugs and going crazy like I'm sure they're doing all sorts of stuff but like I still do go to bars I still do go and like it's different the vibe is different
oh
people are
yeah.
not they're on their phones they're not talking to people the way they used to and yeah it's things things have changed.
Yeah, I mean that's a change in the sexual economy, but also just a change generally culturally. And one thing in Entourage is yes, it's sex. They're having a lot of casual sex, but even just some of the businessy stuff that ends up happening to them, it's all there's that serendipity, and that's one of the things that's fun about watching it is you see them kind of living. I mean, I don't want to be cliche and be like, look, no, no cell phones, everyone living in the moment. But yeah, you watch it and you see fewer to no cell phones, everyone living in a moment. I think that's part of what makes this so nostalgic, even though it's not that old in the grand scheme of things, is that it's pre iPhone. But on the sexual topic, I mean, I think that, I'll tie this episode in with our second episode we ever did on Hartist's blog and the Manosphere to Literature pipeline, where we sort of talked about how Hartist's blog and really all of the early Manosphere was a product of this same sexual and social era that is on Entourage, where it was it was when pickup sort of worked, supposedly. Again, not from my own experience, but I hear.
Too young.
And when you actually would meet people in bars, that doesn't really happen anymore at all, I don't think. Game, whatever you want to call it. This era is the same era that brought us Entourage is the era that brought us Chateau Hartiste, undoubtedly. And yeah, no, it just kind of part of what makes the show nostalgic, but also just like sociologically interesting, is charting that change. And again, we're not here to play social theorists, although we keep on putting that hat on. I guess that's something that a show like Entourage does to you. I think that it does encapsulate the era so well, and it kind of encapsulates different mores and aspirations so well that it is. And I'm sure, unfortunately, from a woke angle, I'm sure there are a lot of sort of more academic studies on Entourage versus from like TV theory departments at universities, because it is a show that captures stuff very well.
Absolutely. It captures an aspirational lifestyle, but also is a time capsule of an era where men were more sexually free. There wasn't this sense of like God, like even if we're to take it, we have been talking about what it was like for the everyman, not for Vincent Chase, but if I'm to take it to the life on campus, the life on campus that I lived in 2007, 2008, I have every reason to believe that fast forward 5 years, they set up those Title IX kangaroo courts. So like, I think probably many of my drunken hookups, like, who knows what could have, happened to me in that system. And, it, like, in very many tangible ways, the culture turned against men after Entourage.
I think
it turned against men economically, manufacturing jobs, facing probably the steepest layoffs after the Great Recession. It turned against men sexually with the advent of Tinder, with the also with the layoffs. Like, it's really, a man who doesn't make money, it's hard to, be as attractive. Although, again, Tacos would debate that. Mm-hmm. Tacos has his own point of view on these, which is irrelevant. And, but this is not a pod about Tacos dating theories. So, yeah, I mean, things changed dramatically after the Great Recession. And Entourage was a time capsule of an era.
The moment right before the recession, basically.
A kind of like cultural peak for men, I would say.
Yeah, no, and a certain kind of male freedom. Now, let's add some caveats to this. I don't think this is like far from the height of what men can be. This show is
absolutely
wildly entertaining. And obviously it is great to see a certain sort of male freedom and just casual enjoyment of life, especially given that in the time since then, that kind of thing has significantly receded. That said, like, let's to put it in context, no, I don't think what the characters on Entourage do is any kind of peak. It's almost it's the classic meme that comes up all the time. Hard men make good times.
Yes, that's exactly what I was
thinking. These are the good times that made soft men.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Fucking doubt. So look, honestly,
weak men make hard times.
Weak men make hard times, and also even not to pussyfoot here, but even like some of the Me Too stuff. Obviously, we can talk about the excesses of Me Too, but there were probably some pretty douchey, gross rape type stuff that happened at this time. That there should have maybe been more criticism. I don't know if you'll agree with me, Dan, but all of this,
sure.
all of this is nuanced. I'm not saying that douchebaggery, and I don't use that term lightly. Like there is a lot of that, and just general vapidity of some of the male behavior. I'm not saying that is like any kind of pinnacle, and that we shouldn't be uncritical of it. But it's just, go on. Sorry.
Here's something interesting. It's not in the notes, but it occurs to me now. I obviously we're not in the midst of a war or anything, but I do think we're in some like low-key hard times era.
Oh,
right
for sure.
now.
Yeah.
And like, so we're perhaps in some ways the beneficiary of that, because it, hard times make strong men. And I know for certain, if I weren't, reacting to the current culture, I wouldn't be as sexually conservative.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be as kind of focused on like, I have a mission to, write my art, to get my art out there. I have a mission to, do whatever, take care of my family. And like, it's just kind of like, it instills within you the kind of the uncertainty or the things you're reacting against to kind of build in you a sort of strength. And so what I think would be interesting is, well, what would the entourage be today? Like, what's an entourage for, like, okay, if Vincent and Turtle and E were the good times make weak men, if they're the weak men, well, what about a show about the strong men?
Yeah, I mean,
made
what
by hard
would that?
times.
Yeah,
I mean, not to be too clearly we're the strongest men of all. Like, obviously, that's not true.
No, it's
but,
Come Town. It's I'm kidding, but yeah,
yeah,
but,
it's the hard men.
Yeah, no. What I mean, it's hard to think
chews.
what that television show would look like, because so much of our lives no longer lend themselves to television, in my humble opinion, in the way that a casual lifestyle of the 2000s did. Again, because of that serendipity. Serendipity lends itself really well to sitcoms. Where is the serendipity in our lives? It's all meticulously planned out, to the T on our damn phones. So it. Yeah.
I'm gonna be maybe self-referential here, and maybe people will say like, "This is the fucking worst idea I've ever heard, Dan. This is stupid." But like, there is a real cultural renaissance on the right, and there are people out there going to parties and having fun and like doing crazy shit. And we even talked about how we might talk about the De Beer thing. And like, I don't know how much we want to get into that, but
sure. No, there is a burgeoning sort of more. Our thing here is kind of becoming more IRL, and I think that there is a lot of cultural energy here, which is why a lot of people who aren't even politically of the right are attracted to it. And there's more of like an IRL social element, especially over there in New York City, it seems like.
Yeah. And so, like, I feel like if one were to do a show about kind of like young men today, it would be a show about the kind of like right-wing counterculture.
I guess, which is not a show that would get made, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like these are the guys like running around doing the crazy shit, and in a kind of culture that is like neutered. It's an area where there's still some Brill, where there's a lot of Brill. And I mean, I think that's why, a lot of women are attracted to this sphere, because, number one, like any sphere where you have, if I keep saying Brill, I'm going to sound like any sphere where you have vitality, you are going to attract art. And so good art is being made on the right because it's audacious, because it's, you need vitalism to create good art. And so that brings, like, if you build it, they will come. If you build up good art, they will come.
Definitely.
And, people are coming, Matt.
Yeah. Come Town again. We're a little more pressed for time on this episode than normal, so I'll try and we can try and sort of not wrap it up yet, but maybe move in that direction of just kind of summing up our final thoughts here. I think you this wasn't even in our notes. I think you summed it all up really well with that Wile E. Coyote metaphor. And yeah, I think this show, there's, I guess where it's like in summation here, you could kind of look at it from two angles. You could kind of look at it nostalgically, like, oh, this era was really fun. And you also could look at it as these are sort of the weak men who made hard times in a certain sense. Because, yeah, I mean, they are very apolitical. They definitely are not principled. They definitely don't have any values. And I don't want to sound like some moral fag conservative here, but, in a more concrete and meaningful sense, they don't have values that secure the future, shall we say. They're sleeping around. Even just career wise, to get more into the plot of the show, Vince ends up making horrendous decisions. And there's a little bit of a thing where it's like he's more of the pure artist and he wants to do his own projects, but like he's a dumbass. Like he makes terrible financial decisions. He makes some bad artistic decisions, and like, well, that's one of the things I wanted to comment on is, for as much of this show is like a little, a show you could look at through rose-colored glasses and be like, this is a really nice era. It's very sober in terms of, again, I'm not done with it yet, but 5 seasons in, it's like things have kind of gone, things keep going wrong, basically. A lot of it, Vince's big thing in like season 2 is he stars in Aquaman, which is funnily a real movie now. At the time, it wasn't. At the time, they were just like pulling what would be a generic superhero movie. They were pulling it on their ass. And I think it becomes the highest grossing film of all time in the universe of Entourage. So he's a big, big star. That's pretty much the main good thing that happens to him. The rest of the time, he's kind of chasing after these projects that sound really artistically highfalutin to him, but like definitely don't maximize the success he could have. Mostly working with this very douchey director named Billy Walsh in the show. And then they end up making a disaster of a movie based on the life of Pablo Escobar, which is, again, just as a little bit of an aside, really neither here nor there. This I also thought was a very charming, funny sort of encapsulation of the era. They make this movie based on the life of Pablo Escobar. It's this big independently funded thing that they kind of produce themselves. And their whole thing the whole time is like, this is our Scarface. This is our Scarface. And if you remember the 2000s, for whatever reason, by the way, I like the movie Scarface, so I'm not putting it down, but like it is almost puzzling in retrospect, like why every film bro or even just normal dude in like the 2000s thought Scarface was like the absolute peak of cinematic achievement. I mean, does that resonate, Dan? Do you remember?
It does. I feel like,
there's like everyone had the shirt, and like everyone thought that was like the best movie of all time in like 2008.
I mean, for me, that was like I was in college, and so it was like the prototypical college bro film. Yeah, lots of people on my floor had the Scarface poster up, and they were always the douchiest guys. It's always the guy who's like, the biggest dickwad who has like a big Scarface, and he's just like, the money, women, honor.
And this also was downstream, I think, entirely from the fact that Scarface is also extensively referenced in hip hop. Just to touch on this briefly, because I think it's relevant. This same era we're talking about was a relative era, was an era of relatively low racial tension, and also the peak of hip hop's mainstream appeal. This was 50 Cent era. You see Turtle in the show almost dresses like 50 Cent. This was an era where, as a white bro, you would just listen to hip hop. That was your thing, and it wasn't like, oh, you listen to hip hop and you also had a Black Lives Matter sticker. No, you just like hip hop, and you didn't like it because of civil rights reasons. You liked it because it was masculine and represented all these sort of aspirations of having money and women that were also it's the same thing with Scarface, basically. That was like, at the time, that was very like cool, if a bit normie, was to basically be like, I like power, I like sports, women, like it was that era of broiness. And I think the hip hop has something to do with it, and the Scarface of it all has something to do with it. And again, you see this in spades in Entourage. You see it very much. They're always listening to Jay-Z and 50 Cent and whatever else, and they love Scarface as, again, this peak of cinematic achievement, and they even make their own Scarface in this movie, Medellin, which then bombs at Cannes, sort of sending the series into the sort of post Hangover period, or like you could maybe, again, I haven't seen all of it, but I the way the show's going now into season 5, when after their film on Pablo Escobar, Medellin, has bombed, it's almost like they're waking up hungover a little bit now. And that season started in 2008, so coincidence? I think not. I think that, we can kind of chart the whole history of this series as the end of a dream, waking up into a bit of a hangover state.
Yeah, I think what what it kind of boils down to is, if you were to make a sitcom or a TV show that's kind of investigates the fourth turning style issues of our time back then, it would just seem insane. It'd be like, this is conspiracy shit. This is like, You belong in Austin with Alex Jones, and we don't even know who Alex Jones is, because
he's just some guy making Joker videos about Obama.
Yeah. But like, now, if you make something like Entourage, it'd be like think about the shows that we like now, the mainstream shows even that we like now, Succession, White Lotus. Like, you can't ignore that essentially there's issues that are breaking America, and those shows don't ignore them. They don't confront them in a based way. They're not like, these are not our shows.
I mean, I would argue that they sort of are, but I mean, we've talked about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's something to be. There's an argument to be made there, but like, nevertheless, you need to deal with them. You need to grapple with them, and like, Entourage was a response to its time, and its time was such that, like, these kind of fundamentally deranging issues, they were there, but they were so buried below the surface by kind of surface level prosperity that it would have, you would have to have been deranged to focus on them. And like, truly, like, the people, like the R guys of that era, they were just, like, broadly thought of as like total kooks.
Well, they were in the Ron Paul movement. They were starting podcasts called The Stark Truth in 2010. It's like, no, seriously, no, they were. Well, that gets into a whole other interesting thing. Like, they were. It's not that they were right about a lot, but they were on the fringe of society in the way that they're just not anymore. Even some of this is to go on a tangent, but like, even some of the more normie sort of reviews of that Alex Lee Moyer, Alex's War documentary, sort of, which
I'm watching right now.
It's pretty good. Alex Lee Moyer should come on the pod if anyone knows her. But no, we know people who know her. We do. We should look at that. But like, even some of the more normie reviews are like, some of the more liberal reviews were like, we're all sort of Alex Jones now. And we are, I think, not that we're saying or behaving as, not that we're going out as far out of limb as Alex Jones sometimes does, but like, it's this kind of post consensus society that we are in, where we even, honestly, on both sides, obviously there is still an establishment, and there's still very much establishmentarians, and there's still an establishment sort of enforcing its will upon us, which I don't think we're going to have time necessarily to do a current events segment today, but we can talk about the FBI and all that. But there still is an establishment, but we're kind of all variously at odds with it, and we are kind of in this post-truth era a little bit. This is going too far down the rabbit hole, but no. So you bring up a good point. This was an era where Ron Paul. I mean, I was younger, but I do remember Ron Paul, and I remember people who didn't like McCain or Obama. That was kind of that era, and they were viewed as kooky. But like, as soon as the recession hits, like, well, maybe they're right about something, and we're obviously coming out of the Iraq War at the time. Even then, there was a sense of like, oh gosh, maybe some of these ideas are correct, and that has grown in the 10 years since then to the point where it's like, we are all sort of in that position of coming to our own conclusions, and we're all disillusioned.
That's for sure, unfortunately. But I mean, disillusioned, but also like going back to the whole fourth turning of it all. I think, perhaps more inspired than our cohorts. I'm certainly more inspired than I was when I was 20 or 22.
Oh yeah,
And
no.
it's like, yeah, it's,
Well, look, yeah, like look at the show again. Haven't completed it yet, but look at the show. That what comes of all that luxury and all that wealth. They have a good run of it, but it kind of they don't really make good movies. They don't really make good art,
yeah,
and they kind of just get older, and end up having to go to rehab, and that's just that. Whereas like now, for as bad as things are, I think there is a more fecund sort of cultural energy burbling up. So yeah, hard times make strong men, or at least creative men, in a way that, because in some ways you could look at Entourage as a show. It's about people kind of failing to make good art in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I think
yeah.
what the phrase we're looking for is hard times make strong podcasts, Matt. New Right.
Like New Right.
And hard times have cast our podcast into a crucible, and we are now hard as iron, really.
Hard as iron, indeed, yeah. Well, I think we can just about wrap it up. I mean, any other thoughts? There's probably more we could say about Entourage, but
Blood and Bowden, Matt.
Yeah.
Blood and Bowden.
Yeah.
No, I mean, no real final thoughts here. Like, it was a good show. It was fun. But yeah, it's a kind of breezy time capsule of an era that ultimately was a bit of a frivolous time.
Yeah, and I think that sort of gets to the heart of it. I had in my notes, like, intriguingly, a couple of the actors from Entourage have been sort of Me Too'd since then. We didn't really talk so much about Me Too in the changing face of Hollywood, but you know what? Honestly,
I mean, we all know.
What more is there to say? No, you couldn't make this show anymore because it's not woke. And no, but yeah, even in real life, sort of Jeremy Piven and Kevin Connolly have both had their various brushes with that. So they're acting in the show, but this was also the product of a Hollywood that, again, I wasn't around for it, but I do have the sense that it was genuinely somewhat like the Hollywood portrayed in the show, where it was more of a boys' club, and that is no more. But there's really what's to be said about that hasn't already been said. It's the show about a bygone era, but
yeah, which was not really an era where, I mean, a lot of great art was produced, and I'm hopeful in some respects that our current tumultuous culture is going to lead to great art. And that is, perhaps one of the white pills, as they say.
Yeah, no, I genuinely, I think that is a white pill to swallow in all this. But
it's a nutcracker.
All right. Until next time.